The day Eleanor found out, she wasn't crying. She was standing in the lobby of the Fairmont Chateau Frontenac, holding 2 cups of coffee, watching her husband of 19 years walk through the revolving door with another woman's luggage in his hand. Not beside the woman, not behind her. His hand on the handle of her bag, the way he used to carry Eleanor's things when they were young, and he still thought small gestures mattered. Eleanor Voss set both cups down on the concierge desk, very carefully so they wouldn't spill. That was the thing people never understood about moments like this. You didn't fall apart right away. Your body kept doing things. Kept breathing, kept balancing, kept making sure the coffee didn't spill. While some deeper part of you was already doing the math. Already counting 19 years and 3 business restructurings, and the second mortgage she'd quietly taken out on her family's property in the eastern townships to keep Hargrove Capital from going under. 'Cause her husband had asked her to. Because he'd said, "I need you, Ellie. I can't do this without you." And she had believed him. She watched Daniel Voss guide the woman, Serena Caldwell, a name Eleanor had seen twice on his phone and once on a hotel invoice she wasn't supposed to find, toward the elevator bank. He had his hand on the small of Serena Caldwell's back, not his wife's back, not the back of the woman who had restructured his entire investment portfolio during the 2008 crash and saved 43 jobs, including his own. The other woman's back. Eleanor picked up one of the cups of coffee, drank it slowly, watched the elevator doors close. Then she went back upstairs to their suite, the one she had booked, with her points on her card. And she sat by the window overlooking the St. Lawrence River and she thought for a very long time. She had come to Quebec City because Daniel had asked her to. That was the detail that kept snagging in her mind as the afternoon light shifted gold across the water. He had told her it was an important client weekend. He had told her the firm's biggest institutional investor, a man named Gilles Thibodeau, was flying in from Montreal, and that it would mean a great deal if Eleanor was there. She had rearranged her own schedule, a board meeting in Toronto, a call with her foundation's legal team, to be here. She had flown in from Toronto on a Friday morning. Daniel had driven up from Ottawa the night before, alone, he said, to get things prepared. She understood now what he had been preparing. The conference was real. She had met Gilles Thibodeau at dinner the evening before, a polite older man who drank Bordeaux slowly and asked her thoughtful questions about the Voss Family Foundation's work in rural healthcare. The conference was real, and it was a cover, and Daniel had used the cover so well he'd almost forgotten to be careful. Almost. He hadn't expected Eleanor to come down for coffee at 8 in the morning. He hadn't expected her to be standing in the lobby. He had mentioned casually, over the phone 3 days ago, that she should feel free to sleep in on Saturday because the morning sessions were just internal. She had wanted to surprise him with coffee. Eleanor looked at the river. The river did not have an opinion about any of this. She opened her laptop. The thing that most people didn't know about Eleanor Voss, the thing that Daniel had perhaps forgotten, in the comfortable haze of 19 years, was that she had been a corporate attorney before she became a philanthropist. Not a mediocre one. She had made partner at 31 at one of the oldest firms in Toronto, which was not something women did in those years without being considerably sharper than everyone else in the room. She had left law when they had their son Thomas. She had left law a second time, more completely, when Daniel's firm was struggling and she decided that one of them needed to have full attention on the family finances. And it wasn't going to be Daniel, who was charming and visionary and almost completely incapable of reading a balance sheet without getting a headache. She had restructured Hargrove Capital's debt twice. She had negotiated the buyout of a junior partner who had been quietly embezzling for 2 years. She had co-signed the operating line of credit that currently kept the firm liquid, because Daniel's personal credit had been damaged by a real estate deal in 2016 that she had advised him not to make, and he had made it anyway, and she had quietly absorbed the consequences. None of this was in Daniel's promotional materials, which described him as a self-made man. She had always found that description a little funny. She found it considerably less funny now. Eleanor opened the file she kept on a secured cloud drive, not shared with Daniel, never shared with Daniel, and she began to read. She had started the file 8 months ago. Not because she had suspected anything at first. She had started it because Daniel had begun doing something she recognized from her years in law, as a particular kind of financial behavior. He was routing money through accounts she didn't have easy access to, in small enough amounts to avoid automatic flagging, in a pattern that only looked like a pattern if you knew what you were looking at. She knew what she was looking at. Over 8 months she had assembled a quiet and precise picture. The company card charges at restaurants she hadn't been to. The hotel invoices, not this one, others, under a corporate account that technically belonged to Hargrove Capital, which technically Eleanor co-owned through her original investment of $1.8 million in 2004, and the subsequent loan of $650,000 she had extended from her family trust in 2019. The flights. Business class, Toronto to Vancouver, 3 times in the past year, for a woman listed in the expense system as a client relationship consultant. Eleanor had looked up Serena Caldwell. She had a LinkedIn profile that described her as a strategic communications advisor and listed Hargrove Capital as a client engagement going back 14 months. She was 34 years old. She had a degree from Western and 3 years at a PR firm in Calgary before going independent. She was very pretty in her LinkedIn photo. Eleanor thought about that for a moment and then set the thought aside. Because it was not useful information. What was useful? Serena Caldwell had been given access to a Hargrove Capital corporate email account. What was useful? She had attended at least 2 internal client meetings, which meant she had potentially been exposed to information that was subject to confidentiality agreements that all firm employees and contractors were required to sign. What was useful? Eleanor had checked, and Serena Caldwell had not signed one. That was a problem. That was Daniel's problem, specifically, because Eleanor's name was on the operating agreement, and if a confidentiality breach led to a client dispute, Eleanor's personal liability exposure was not zero. She had spoken to her own lawyer about this 6 weeks ago, framed as a hypothetical. Her lawyer had been very clear. Thomas called at noon. He was in his 2nd year at Dalhousie, studying marine biology, and he called his mother every Saturday with the regularity of someone who had been raised to understand that small consistencies were a form of love. "Hey Mom, how's Quebec City?" "Beautiful," Eleanor said, which was true. "Your father and I are at the Chateau, fancy. How's the conference?" "Full of people who use the word synergy without irony." Thomas laughed. He had his mother's laugh, which was dry and arrived a little late, like it had to clear an internal checkpoint first. "Is Dad behaving himself?" Eleanor looked out at the river. "He's being very much himself. That's not a yes." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." There was a pause. Thomas was perceptive in the way that quiet children often are. He had spent a lot of years watching his parents navigate the particular kind of marriage that looked like a partnership from the outside and felt, from the inside, like something more complicated. He didn't push. He knew she would tell him what she wanted to tell him when she was ready. "I love you, Mum." "I love you too, sweetheart." After she hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand for a while. She thought about Thomas at 12, when Daniel had missed his school's winter concert because of a client dinner that turned out to be reschedulable. She thought about Thomas at 15, when Daniel had forgotten his birthday until Eleanor reminded him over breakfast and he'd managed to look genuinely surprised as if the date had snuck up on him. She thought about the way Thomas always called her first. She thought, "I have been making excuses for a very long time." Then she opened her laptop again and she made some calls. The first call was to her lawyer, Sandra Park, in Toronto. Sandra picked up on the second ring, which was one of the things Eleanor had always appreciated about her. "I'm not calling as a hypothetical this time," Eleanor said. A brief pause. "I see. Where are you?" "Quebec City, Fairmont." "When did you find out this morning?" 8 o'clock. "I watched him carry her bags." Another pause. Eleanor could hear Sandra thinking, which sounded like the soft click of a pen cap. "Eleanor, before you do anything." "I'm not going to do anything dramatic, Sandra. You know me better than that." She looked down at the file open on her laptop. "But I want to begin moving not dramatically, carefully. The operating agreement." "I know. That's exactly what I want to talk about." They spoke for 45 minutes. Eleanor took notes in a small leather notebook she always carried, writing in the precise shorthand she'd developed in law school and never lost. When they finished, Sandra said, "Are you all right?" "Yes," Eleanor said, and she meant it in the technical sense. Her hands were not shaking. Her voice was steady. Her coffee, which she had ordered a second time, was getting cold. Whether she was all right in some larger sense was a question she planned to defer until later, when she had more data. The second call was to Gilles Thibodeau. This required more thought. She stood at the window for 10 minutes before she dialed, working out the precise tone and content of what she needed to say. Gilles was not just a client. He was the firm's largest investor. A man whose continued confidence in Hargrove Capital represented approximately 30% of the firm's assets under management. He was also, she had determined over dinner the evening before, a man of considerable old-fashioned principle. He had talked about his late wife with the warmth of someone who understood what loyalty meant. He had talked about his children with the particular pride of a man who believed his name was a kind of inheritance. He answered warmly, "Madame Voss, I hope the morning has been pleasant." "Very pleasant, thank you, Gilles. I hope you'll forgive me for calling on a Saturday. I wanted to ask your advice on something rather sensitive, and I thought a conversation was better than an email." A slight shift in his tone. Attentive now, the way experienced business people became when they understood something important was about to be said. "Of course, please," she told him, carefully and without visible emotion, that she had become aware of a situation at Hargrove Capital, involving the unauthorized access of internal documents by an individual who was not a signed party to the firm's standard confidentiality framework. She did not name Serena Caldwell. She did not name Daniel. She spoke in the measured, precise language of someone who had spent a decade managing sensitive legal matters. And she said that as a co-owner of the firm's operating agreement, she felt it was her obligation to flag this to the firm's most significant investor, before it became a formal matter. There was a long silence. "I see," said Jill Thibodeau in the tone of a man who understood far more than he was saying. "I thought you should know," Eleanor said, "before the afternoon session." Another silence. "I appreciate your candor, Madame Voss, I appreciate it very much." After she hung up she thought, Daniel doesn't know yet that today's session is going to go differently than he planned. What happened in the afternoon session, Eleanor was not there to witness. She had ordered lunch in the suite and eaten it while reviewing the documents Sandra had sent over, a 40-page summary of the operating agreement's terms regarding ownership rights and fiduciary responsibilities. It was dry reading. She found it calming, the same way she had always found legal documents calming. The precision of them, the way they said exactly what they meant and meant exactly what they said. Daniel came back to the suite at 4:30. She heard the door open, heard him pause, which meant he had seen her at the desk and was recalibrating. "I didn't know you were up," he said. "I've been up since 7, she said. She did not look away from her laptop. "I brought you coffee earlier, you weren't in the room." A silence that stayed perhaps 4 seconds. "I went for a walk," Daniel said. Eleanor looked up at him then. She looked at him the way she used to look at opposing counsel in depositions, when they had just said something that everyone in the room knew was not true, and the only question was whether they knew that she knew. Daniel Voss was 53 years old, and still handsome in the way that men who have always been handsome sometimes are. A little worn, a little softer around the edges, but still recognizably the person he had been at 32 when she had married him in a ceremony at her parents' property in the eastern townships. He was looking at her now with the expression she had seen on him before, the one that meant he was calculating. "You saw," he said. Not a question. "I saw," she said. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He ran a hand through his hair. He began to say the things that men say in these moments, the words that arrive in a particular order, first the deflection, then the partial admission, then the pivot to complexity. "It's not what you think, it's complicated, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Serena is... It's not serious, Ellie, it was a mistake." Eleanor let him talk. She had always been good at letting people talk. It was the first thing her mentor had taught her. In her articling year, the persons who stops talking first loses. Let them fill the silence. They'll tell you everything you need. Daniel talked for 11 minutes. She knew because she could see the clock on the desk behind him. When he finished she said, "I spoke with Sandra this morning." The silence that followed was different from the previous one. "Heavier." "Sandra," he repeated, "and with Jill Thibodeau." The color changed in his face, not dramatically, Daniel was too controlled for that, but she saw it, the slight draining. "Jill's," he said carefully. What did you tell him?" "I told him what I was legally obligated to tell him," Eleanor said. "As a co-owner of the operating agreement, which is that there may be a confidentiality exposure issue related to a contractor who doesn't have a signed NDA having access to internal documents." She paused. "That's a real issue, Daniel. That's not something I manufactured. Serena Caldwell doesn't have a signed confidentiality agreement and she's been attending internal meetings. If Giles, or any other client decides to treat that as a breach of fiduciary duty, the liability falls on both of us." Are you threatening me?" "I'm telling you facts." She closed her laptop. "The same way I told you facts in 2016 when I said the Ottawa development deal was a bad idea. The same way I told you facts in 2019, when I said the junior partner needed to be audited. You remember how both of those situations resolved, I assume?" He remembered. She could see him remembering. "What do you want, Eleanor?" It was the first time in 11 years he had called her Eleanor instead of Ellie. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to understand something very clearly before we talk about what happens next. I have spent 19 years protecting this family and this business. I have done that quietly and I have done it well and I have done it without requiring you to acknowledge it. That stops now." She stood up. She was not angry, not the way she thought she might be. She was something cooler than angry, something that felt more like clarity. "We are going to go downstairs for the gala dinner tonight, because Jill Thibodeau is there and because appearances matter. And on Monday morning you are going to call Sandra's office and begin the process that she'll outline for you. I've already asked her to send you the terms." "The terms?" he repeated slowly. "You've already..." "I've had 8 months, Daniel." She picked up her jacket from the chair. "Did you think I wasn't paying attention?" She had not expected the gala to be easy. It was not easy. It was 90 minutes of candles and white tablecloths and a string quartet playing something by Chacon in a corner, and Jill Thibodeau who shook Eleanor's hand with both of his and said, quietly, "You are a remarkable woman," in a way that suggested he understood rather more than he was prepared to say in public. Daniel was very well behaved. He had always been good at events. He smiled and shook hands and made the small talk that these evenings required, and from across the room, Eleanor imagined that they looked like what they had always appeared to be. A successful couple, well-matched, easy in each other's company. She thought about all the years she had worked to make them look that way. She thought about the operating agreement and the $1.8 million from 2004 and the $650,000 from 2019. and the second mortgage on her family's property in the eastern townships that she had paid off herself, quietly 3 years ago, without telling him. Because she had started to feel, even then, that it was important to know clearly what was hers and what was his. She thought about Thomas calling every Saturday. Thomas, who always called her first. She thought, I am not destroyed by this, and she was a little surprised to find that it was true. She left the gala early. She told Daniel she had a headache, which was mostly true, and she went back upstairs and she stood on the balcony of their suite and looked at the St. Lawrence River in the dark. The lights of Lavis were reflected on the water, blurred and moving. It was a beautiful city. She had always wanted to come here in the summer. She thought she might come back. On her own terms, her phone buzzed a message from Sandra. Sent the draft terms to his counsel. We can talk Monday, you okay? Eleanor looked at the river. She thought about the woman she had been at 31 making partner. She thought about the woman she had been at 34, deciding to step back from the firm for her family. She thought about 19 years of quiet competence, of fixing things before they broke, of being the foundation that other people built their visible lives on top of. She typed back, yes, more than okay. She meant it. There was one more thing. She had not planned it. Or she told herself she hadn't planned it. But when she was standing at the elevator the next morning, her luggage all ready with the bellhop, she saw Serena Caldwell coming through the lobby with her bags. Alone this time. Looking tense the way people look when a weekend has ended differently than they expected. Their eyes met. Eleanor looked at this woman. 34 years old, strategic communications advisor, very pretty, very likely not a bad person in any way that would have been legible from the outside. And she felt something she had not anticipated. Not anger. Something closer to pity. The kind of pity you feel for someone who has been told they are the main character of a story when actually they are a plot device. Serena Caldwell held her gaze for a moment. Then she looked away first. Eleanor stepped into the elevator. On the flight back to Toronto, she ordered a glass of wine she didn't really want and looked out the window at the cloud cover below and thought about what came next. There was a great deal that came next. There were legal processes and financial restructurings and conversations with Thomas that she was not looking forward to. And there would be a period of things being difficult and untidy in the way that the ending of long things always was. But she had been a corporate attorney for 12 years before she had been anything else, and what she knew, what she had always known, even when she had set it aside, was that the person who does the preparation wins. Not always quickly, not always loudly. But the person who has read every document and spoken to the right people and waited patiently for the right moment almost always walks away with what matters. She had done the preparation. She had $1.8 million from 2004 and $650,000 from 2019, and her name on an operating agreement and a conversation with G.L. Thibodeau that had, she knew from Sandra's message, prompted him to request a full audit of the firm's expense accounts before committing to the next phase of his investment. She had 19 years of knowing exactly what this business was worth and exactly what she had put into it. And she had Thomas, who called every Saturday, who had always called her first. The clouds broke briefly below her and she saw the gray glitter of Lake Ontario coming into view, and she thought of her parents' property in the eastern townships, the land that had been in her family for 3 generations, the mortgage she had quietly paid off, and she thought, that is still mine, that was always mine. The plane began its descent toward Toronto. Eleanor Voss finished her wine, tucked the glass back onto the tray, and opened her notebook to a fresh page. There was work to do. There had always been work to do. The difference now was that she was doing it entirely for herself.